Hello Year 11s and welcome to this video on defamation. There are three things that you need to do while you're watching this video. The first thing is to take the very best Cornell notes that you can. The second thing is to use the pause and rewind functions. Use the pause function if you need to stop this video to take notes. Use the rewind function if you want to go over any information contained in this video. And the third thing that you need to do is have your vocabulary sheets open in front of you so that you can write into your vocabulary sheets the definitions of key terms or of any other words the meaning of which you're unfamiliar with. Once you've finished watching this video, make sure that you read the pages from the textbook referred to on this slide. And if you find any additional information from that reading that you think is useful, then include that information in your Cornell notes. Well, let's get started then.
On this slide, I've set out your two learning intentions for this video. Make sure that you write these learning intentions down in your Cornell notes. The first learning intention is that you should be able to describe the elements of and defences to defamation and apply this knowledge to a hypothetical defamation case. You should be able to achieve the first part of this learning intention, that is, you should be able to describe the elements of and defences to defamation as a result of watching and taking notes on this video. The second part of this learning intention is that you should be able to apply this knowledge to a hypothetical defamation case. This requires you to use the knowledge that you have acquired as a result of watching and taking notes on this video. In class, I'll be giving you a number of case studies to do that will help you to achieve this part of the learning intention. The second learning intention is that you should be able to describe the impacts of defamation. And we'll look at that towards the end of this video. Defamation is a tort which involves damaging a person's personal or professional reputation in the community by making untrue statements about them. Look down the left-hand side of your vocabulary sheet, find the term defamation and write this definition in there. A tort is just an old-fashioned word for a civil wrong. The plaintiff has the burden of proving that the defendant has committed the civil wrong of defamation. To do this, the plaintiff must prove each of the four requirements of defamation, that I'll go through shortly, on the balance of probabilities. In other words, for a plaintiff's claim of defamation to be upheld, the plaintiff must prove that it is probable, that is, more likely than not, that each of these four requirements is satisfied. The first requirement for defamation is that the defendant must make a defamatory statement. A defamatory statement is a statement that lowers a person's reputation in the community, exposing that person to ridicule, contempt, or hatred. Look down the left-hand side of your vocabulary sheets, find the term defamatory statement, and write this definition in there. Ridicule means that the defamatory statement would cause people in the community to laugh at the plaintiff. For example, as where the defendant says that the plaintiff believes that the earth is flat. Other people in the community are likely to think that the plaintiff is a real dill for having this view, particularly when science clearly tells us that the earth is round. Contempt means that the defamatory statement would cause people in the community to look down on or scorn the plaintiff. For example, as where the defendant says that the plaintiff doesn't believe in helping the poor or the sick.
Other people in the community are likely to look down on, that is, to have contempt for the plaintiff as someone who is very selfish.
Hatred means that the defamatory statement would cause people in the community to hate the plaintiff.
For example, as where the defendant says the plaintiff dislikes Arabs, Buddhists, or same-sex attracted people.
Other people in the community, including Arabs, Buddhists, or same-sex attracted people, are likely to hate the plaintiff for having these racist, anti-religious, or homophobic views. The second requirement for defamation is that the defamatory statement, that is what the defendant has said or written, must be untrue. This is a fairly self-explanatory requirement.
The third requirement for defamation is that the defamatory statement, that is, what the defendant has said or written, must refer to the plaintiff. The defamatory statement could refer to the plaintiff by name. For example, Mr. Anderson is untrustworthy. Alternatively, the defamatory statement could refer to a group that the plaintiff is part of. For example, all Year 11 teachers at Victoria University Secondary College are untrustworthy. In that case, the statement would be referring to Mr. Anderson as he is one of the Year 11 teachers at Victoria University Secondary College. A final way in which the defamatory statement could refer to the plaintiff is where the context in which people hear or read the statement is such that it is reasonable to conclude that the statement is referring to the plaintiff. For example, if a person states that the leader of the free world is untrustworthy, then it is reasonable to conclude that the statement is referring to the current President of the United States as being untrustworthy. This is because it is the President of the United States, not the Pope, not the Chinese President, and not even the Prime Minister of Australia, who is universally regarded as the leader of the free world. The fourth requirement for defamation is that the defendant must publish the defamatory statement. All this means is that the defendant must communicate the statement to a person other than the plaintiff. The defendant can communicate the defamatory statement in writing, for example, in a book or newspaper, or online in a blog, on a Facebook post, or through email. Alternatively, the defendant can communicate the defamatory statement by saying it, for example, as where the defendant makes the defamatory statement during a conversation, or during a television or radio interview, or on a YouTube clip. However, if the only person who the defendant makes the written or verbal statement to is the plaintiff, then that is not defamation. It may be a mean thing to do, but because the defendant has not communicated the statement to a person other than the plaintiff's reputation has not been damaged. And that, of course, is a very important requirement for defamation. For there to be defamation, the defamatory statement could be published to the general public or to a smaller group, such as the readers of a private blog, the recipients of an email, or the members of a political party. Look down the left-hand side of your vocabulary sheets, find the term publish and write a definition of publish in there. Let's now look at a real-life case. Take a moment to pause this video and to read the newspaper article on this slide. In this case, a well-known West Indies cricket player, Chris Gayle, sued Fairfax Media, the publisher of the Sydney Morning Herald, The Age and the Canberra Times newspapers, for publishing a series of articles in which it was stated that Chris Gayle had exposed his genitals to a massage therapist during a massage and that he had indecently propositioned her. To be successful in his defamation action against Fairfax Media, Chris Gayle had to prove the 4 requirements for defamation on the balance of probabilities. The first requirement for defamation is that the defendant, Fairfax Media, must have made a defamatory statement. That is, a statement that lowered Chris Gayle's reputation in the community and exposed him to ridicule, contempt or hatred. In this case, the newspaper articles stated that Chris Gayle exposed his genitals to the massage therapist and indecently propositioned her. In other words, the newspaper articles suggested that Chris Gayle was a sex pest. This damaged Chris Gayle's reputation as a professional batsman and resulted in him being treated with contempt or scorn, as demonstrated by the calls to ban him from international cricket. The second requirement for defamation is that the defamatory statement must be untrue, which it was. Chris Gayle did not actually expose his genitals to the massage therapist or indecently proposition her. The third requirement for defamation is that the defamatory statement must refer to the plaintiff. This requirement is satisfied where the defamatory statement refers to the plaintiff by name, or refers to a group of which the plaintiff is a member, or is made in a context where it is reasonable to conclude that the statement is referring to the plaintiff. In this case, the newspaper reports clearly named Chris Gale as the person who was said to have exposed himself and to have indecently propositioned the massage therapist. And the fourth requirement for defamation is that the defendant published the defamatory statement. That is, that the defendant communicated the defamatory statement either in writing or verbally to the general public or a smaller group. This requirement is satisfied because the defamatory statement was published in 3 newspapers: the Sydney Morning Herald, the Age and the Canberra Times. Because Chris Gale's claim of defamation was upheld, the judge ordered Fairfax Media to pay Chris Gale $300,000 in damages for the damage to his reputation. On this slide, I've set out 4 additional points that you need to remember. First, as I've already said, the plaintiff has the burden of proof in a defamation case. This means that it is the plaintiff which needs to prove on the balance of probabilities that each of the 4 requirements we've looked at is satisfied. The second point is that the defendant does not need to intend to defame the plaintiff. That is, the defendant may truly believe that what they are saying or writing about the plaintiff is true. However, if it is not in fact true, then the defendant can still be liable for defamation. The third point to note is that generally only individuals, that is people, can sue for defamation. Put another way, a company can't sue another person for defaming them. That is, a company can't, generally speaking, be a plaintiff in a defamation action. For example, if an environmental activist writes an article that accuses BHP, which is a major mining company, of being an environmental vandal who is destroying the world, then in that case BHP, which is a company, can't sue the environmental activist in defamation. The exception is that a company can sue a person for defamation if that company has less than 10 employees. The final point is that the limitation period for defamation claims is 1 year after the defamatory statement is first published. That is, if the plaintiff sues the defendant for defamation more than 1 year after the defamatory statement was made, then the defendant has a defence that the defamation claim is time barred and so cannot be brought against the defendant. On this slide, I'm going to describe 3 defences to defamation. There are actually more defences to defamation, but I want you to focus on these 3. These defences are only relevant if the plaintiff has first proved the 4 requirements for defamation. That is, they're only relevant if the plaintiff has first proved that the defendant is liable to the plaintiff in defamation. Now remember, because this is civil law, the defendant will only have the benefit of one of these defences if the defendant can prove that defence on the balance of probabilities. That is, if the defendant can prove that it is more likely than not that the defence exists. The first defence is the defence of justification. That is, it is a defence to defamation if the defamatory statement is substantially true. For example, a statement that a doctor negligently injected a cancer patient with warfarin, that is, a blood clotting medicine, when the doctor actually injected the patient with steroids, which is a muscle building drug, is substantially true. This is because the essence of the statement is that the doctor negligently injected the patient with the wrong drug. Neither warfarin nor steroids are appropriate treatments for cancer. And so, while the defamatory statement was not true, the person who wrote the article about the doctor would have a defence to the doctor's action for defamation because the defamatory statement is substantially true. The focus of the statement is on the negligence of the doctor in injecting the patient with the wrong drug. The second defence to defamation is absolute privilege. Absolute privilege is a defence to defamation in two situations. First, it's a defence if the defendant makes the defamatory statement in Parliament, that is, where the defendant is a Member of Parliament and makes the defamatory statement during the course of a debate in Parliament. If the defendant is a Member of Parliament but makes the defamatory statement other than in the course of parliamentary proceedings, for example when the defendant is speaking to the media, then the defence does not apply. The second situation where absolute privilege is a defence to defamation is where the defendant makes the defamatory statement as part of a court case. That is, when the defendant makes the statement as a witness while giving evidence in the case in court, or makes the statement as a lawyer while arguing the case in court. However, if the defendant makes the defamatory statement in any other circumstances, for example when the defendant is speaking to the media outside the courtroom, then this defence does not apply. Now, why do you think that absolute privilege is a defence to defamation? Take a moment to pause this video and answer this question. The reason for absolute privilege in parliamentary proceedings is that it is important for democracy that parliamentarians can raise issues in Parliament so the Parliament can properly debate those issues. If members of Parliament could be sued for defamation for what they say during parliamentary proceedings, then this would stifle free debate and damage democracy. The reason for absolute privilege in court cases is that it is important for justice that a witness can give evidence that they believe is truthful and that a lawyer can properly present their client's case. If witnesses and lawyers could be sued for defamation for what they say in a court case, then this could mean that witnesses don't give all of the relevant evidence and that lawyers don't present their client's case in the best possible way. This could mean that the outcome of the court case is unfair. The third defence to defamation is honest opinion, that is, where the person is expressing their opinion. For this defence to apply, there must be some factual support for the opinion, even though other people may have different opinions, because opinions are necessarily subjective. For example, this defence could apply if a defendant said that McDonald's hamburgers taste like cardboard, because that is the defendant's opinion as to what McDonald's hamburgers taste like. It would be different if the defendant said that McDonald's hamburgers taste like rat droppings, because that could suggest that there are rat droppings in McDonald's hamburgers in circumstances where there's no evidence that there are, in fact, rat droppings in McDonald's hamburgers. Look down the left-hand side of your vocabulary sheets, find the terms justification, absolute privilege and honest opinion, and write the definitions of each of these defences in your vocabulary sheets. So you now have all the information that you need to describe the elements of defamation, that is the 4 requirements that a plaintiff has to prove, and to describe the defences to defamation, that is the 3 defences that a defendant can prove to avoid being liable for defamation. You'll practice applying this knowledge to hypothetical defamation cases when we do some case studies in class. This brings us to our second learning intention, which is that you must be able to describe the impacts of defamation. Defamation impacts both the plaintiff and the defendant. As far as the plaintiff is concerned, defamation will damage the plaintiff's reputation. Indeed, the first requirement for defamation to be established is that the defamatory statement must lower the plaintiff's reputation in the community. But defamation can also have an emotional impact on the plaintiff, as the defamatory statement and its publication might cause the plaintiff to feel depressed, or it might result in other people who believe the defamatory statement refusing to associate with the plaintiff, or treating the plaintiff with ridicule, contempt or hatred. Again, these are concepts that make up the first requirement for defamation. In addition, as we've seen in the Rebel Wilson case, where a plaintiff is defamed, they might lose their employment or their career prospects or business opportunities where an employer believes the defamatory statement. Insofar as the defendant is concerned, the defendant may be required to pay compensation in the form of damages where the defendant is liable for defaming the plaintiff. This is a financial impact on the defendant. And, particularly where the defendant is a reporter, a successful defamation claim against them is likely to damage their credibility because it suggests that they did not carefully check their facts. Well, that brings us to the end of this video. As a result of watching and taking notes on this video, you should now be able to do two things. The first thing is that you should be able to describe the elements of and defences to defamation and apply this knowledge to a hypothetical defamation case. As I've said, I'll help you to achieve the second part of this learning intention, which requires you to apply your knowledge to a hypothetical defamation case by giving you some case studies that you'll complete in class. The second thing that you should now be able to do is to describe the impacts of defamation. Don't forget to read the pages from the textbook referred to on the first slide in this video. And if you find any additional information from that reading that you think is useful, then supplement your Cornell notes with that additional information. Thank you for your attention.